we're thrilled that there are so many folks on here who want to learn more about how to compost at home and how to reclaim those materials to go back into your soil and keep your yard healthy. This is great. We're really excited to be able to do this. So it's 12:04 now, so I think we'll go ahead and move on to the next little bit. So I first wanted to introduce our group. So we are part of an organization, well, a group called the Greater Quabbin Food Alliance, GQFA for short. You'll hear a little bit more about that towards the end in our logo as well. This alliance is a subset of the Mount Grace Land Conservation Trust. This group was started by a member of that organization about 6 years ago, and we have semi-regular meetings and multiple working groups within the Food Alliance. Our working group is the Food Waste Reduction and Composting Working Group, and our working group is currently made up of Amy Donovan of the Franklin County Solid Waste Management District and Joel Betts of the Worcester County Conservation District, who you will be hearing in the presentation today. Another longtime and very active member is Rick Inez of Clearview Composting, who's joining us by phone today and will be available at the Q&A at the end. And then other members are myself, which I didn't introduce myself earlier. I'm Christy Smythe-Berry. I am with the Center for Ecotechnology and the Recycling Works in Massachusetts program, and you'll hear more about my organization at the very end. We tend to, the Recycling Works program doesn't do a lot of residential stuff, but we do a lot of free assistance for commercial entities. So I'll talk more about that. And then our other members are Deb Habib of Seeds of Solidarity Farm, who also runs the Garlic and Arts Festival, the Quabbin Garlic and Arts Festival. And then Susan Campbell of Drawdown Montague, which is the Montague chapter of the National Drawdown organization that seeks to sequester carbon back in the earth and out of the atmosphere. So I think that's a little bit on us. For more information on our group, you can go to the Greater Quabbin Food Alliance website or the Mount Grace website. And while this class is free, we encourage you to donate to any of the nonprofit organizations that we're working with if you'd like to support more of this kind of work. So with that, I think I'm going to turn it over to our first presenter. And we hope you enjoy the presentation. And thanks for being here.
Hi, everybody. So I'm Amy Donovan with Franklin County Solid Waste District, and we are a municipal agency in Greenfield, Mass. That works with 21 Franklin County towns. And for anybody who doesn't know where any of that is, Franklin County is roughly between Vermont and UMass Amherst. And we have a lot of composting going on, so I'm thrilled to be here today. One thing we didn't cover in the beginning, which I just thought of this morning, is we are going to be sending out a follow-up email, and would love to know how everybody found out about this webinar, because we have had such a fantastic response. Right now we've got 235 people participating. So that will be one of a few questions which we'd love to get answers to after the webinar. So one of the biggest reasons why my organization and the Mass DEP and so many others promote composting is because we've got a trash problem. And here in Massachusetts, we are expected to have 0 landfills left operating by 2031. And the reality of that is that date will come much sooner as landfills fill up and close up. There are no plans to build more landfills in the state. We do have 4 waste incinerators in the state, and that is an option for trash. And it is a little bit controversial. If you Google waste incineration, you will get a lot of opportunities for research. And we've all seen those memes on Facebook about Sweden has waste incinerators. Well, guess what? We do too. We just don't talk about them as much. So our waste incinerator here in the Pioneer Valley is at capacity every single day. It receives 400 tons of trash every single day. I don't know if that's 5 days a week or 6 days a week, but it adds up to quite a lot. And this is a waste to energy facility that actually creates energy, about 4% of the regional power grid from the trash that is burned there every day. through kind of a high-tech process. And the air is cleaned as it comes out of those smokestacks. You can see it there in the picture on the bottom. But again, some people take a lot of issue with that. I'm not here to pass judgment either way. I'm just saying you can do the research and come up with your own conclusions. But we don't have a lot of choices. So a lot of our towns in Western Mass are sending material to one of these incinerators, and they try to do a good job in making sure it's run properly. So to summarize this slide, we've got a lot of trash. It goes to landfills and incinerators. It does not become soil in a landfill. And lastly, it's really expensive. So towns are paying $85 a ton on average to send waste to a facility like these. And then there's transportation. So as the landfills close, we're sending waste as far away as Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and even Ontario into another country. So the carbon footprint of our waste and the cost is going to go up and up in coming years. So it behooves all of us to get good nutritional material like food waste out of the trash and into the soil. Next slide, please.
So my name is Joel Betts. I'm with the Westchester County Conservation District. And I want to emphasize another reason to compost, which is that composting builds soil health. Compost is full of beneficial bacteria, fungi, nematodes, arthropods, which inoculate the soil and help it flourish. So you can see sometimes those things such as earthworms, mycelia and roots from small fungi, but a lot of that stuff is not visible to the eye, but compost is full of it, and that's there's more and more research coming out that that's really beneficial to plant growth. And healthy soil, because it grows healthy, or healthy soil because compost adds and to make healthy soil, grows healthy plants. So higher biological activity from the compost improves soil structure, helping plant root penetration. Increased organic matter improves water and nutrient retention, which lowers your effort and costs. And the compost itself is adding nutrients and minerals that are essential for plant growth. So really, compost is garden gold. And keeping that out of the landfills is not just reducing costs and waste, as Amy said, but it's also improving your gardening practices. So as a district, we try to promote soil health, and there's a number of practices, and composting is a really important one. Composting also reduces greenhouse gas emissions. So there's a number of ways that does that, but I don't want to assume that everyone understands what I mean by that. So climate change is caused by greenhouse gases in the Earth's atmosphere. Some of these are CFCs and nitrous oxide. Another is methane, and then the base one is carbon dioxide. Methane produces 23 times the greenhouse effect that carbon dioxide does. So that means that more methane in the atmosphere will warm the climate more quickly. And waste in landfills is more likely to produce methane, whereas compost process maintains a lot of that carbon in the soil and produces carbon dioxide when it does emit gases. So it has less impact on the climate in that way. Composting also helps slow climate change by physically capturing carbon from food and organic waste and fixing it into the soil. So you can see that really dark compost in the hands at the top of the slide there. That's full of carbon, which would otherwise have been turned into a gaseous form through decomposition and put into the atmosphere if it was in a landfill, for example. And when that ends up in the soil, it's fixed. So you can see on the left here, a high carbon content soil versus on the right here, a low carbon content soil. So when you add compost to your soil, and if you minimize disturbance and keep other healthy soil practices, you'll keep it in the soil, and that keeps it from going into the atmosphere. And then, as I mentioned earlier, composting reduces the inputs of organic matter to landfills, which reduces methane emissions. When organically based materials, such as food waste, decay in landfills, methane is produced, and that's a much more potent greenhouse gas. Whereas when you're composting, it's carbon dioxide, which is a lot less potential to warm the climate. And Amy's going to mention a little bit more about that with an example here.
Yeah, so Christy just reminded me to remind everybody or tell everybody that if you have questions, you can put them in the chat box. So on the bottom of your screen is a little bubble that says chat, and you can type in a question to everyone or to Chris Von Aken, who's our questions master. And also, if you're not muted as a participant, please make sure that you're muted so we don't get feedback. Okay, so you might say, well, why doesn't composting release methane? And there's a very important biological activity that answers that question. When in a landfill, the materials are literally crushed and compressed down into little compact cells. And so that there's no air in the landfill by design. And when biodegradable materials like even paper or any food waste decay, they decay anaerobically. And the anaerobic bacteria that is present in a landfill is what releases the methane. So here's the answer to the question. Composting doesn't release methane because there is oxygen inherent in the composting process. And so a whole different set of bacteria is present, good bacteria that don't release methane in the same number or volume as their cousins in the landfill do. So air is a very important part of composting, and you'll see this picture is of Martin's Farm in Greenfield, and I took this several years ago, so they probably don't want me using this old picture, but I love it because it's a rare moment where the windrow turner is in the up position, and you can see that screw there. It's kind of almost vertical, and that's going to lower down over that compost pile, and that's what makes this commercial composting operation so successful right there. They're mixing that material frequently and adding oxygen throughout that pile in that process. And then just one more thing about Martin's Farm. It is one of the largest compost facilities in the state of Massachusetts, one of the oldest, if not the oldest. And they are currently, well, not currently because the schools are closed, accepting compost from 26 public schools in Franklin County and 5 private schools. So that's almost every single school in this large county that is teaching students that food waste is too good to waste and having them separate food waste. We also have markets in the region, such as Big Y and all the co-ops and Whole Foods restaurant markets like that, plus restaurants and 7 municipal compost programs. So big thank you to Martin's Farm for being a leader for about 30 years in composting. Next slide, please. So composting can save money for your household or for your town, like I mentioned in the first slide. For your household, some of you might live in towns that have a pay-as-you-throw trash system where residents have to buy a special sticker or bag to put their trash in. And this is a philosophy that does work to reduce trash. It kind of gets people to think about their trash with their own personal pocketbook. And if you have to buy that special trash sticker or bag to put your trash out or even bring it to a transfer station, you're going to start thinking about how to get stuff out of your trash. So this picture is actually of my curbside set out in Greenfield, and I don't have any food waste in my compost bag, in my trash bag, sorry, because we compost in our backyard and our front yard, and we send meat-based compostables to Martin's Farm, and they can accept that, which we're going to cover in a moment. So that is the smallest, or one of the smaller trash bag stickers there. It only cost me $1.50 to put that out, and that's what I put out in a week because I have a child and lots of food packaging. And then, as I said earlier, your town, a big budget item in every town is trash disposal. So anytime we can reduce trash, we are saving tax dollars. And then a lot of people, all of us gardeners on the call today, we do go out and buy these bags sometimes of topsoil or garden soil or moo dirt or all kinds of fabulous products. So not to detract from those, but you do have to dispose of that plastic bag which is not recyclable in any program in the world. So reduce that bag and make your own topsoil and garden improvements, and you'll save a little money there too, as well as trash. Next slide, please. So when we think about composting, I came up with the 3 sizes of composting. And as you go up in size of the system, you can compost more volume and more types of materials. So to illustrate this, we've got one of my favorite ways to compost as the small size of composting. And that's an indoor worm bin, also known as vermicomposting. And it uses red wiggler worms, or red worms. Eisenia fetida is the scientific name. And usually I recommend that people do this indoors. And so somebody asked a question about composting in an apartment on our chat board. This would be a great way to compost in an apartment, or if you have a disability, or you just don't want to garden, or you don't like being outside. There's a million reasons to do this, and it's great with kids too. So in this small system, we really only compost raw vegetables, fruits. Some people do bread. I don't, because it creates a little bit of mold. And then coffee grounds and eggshells. And we definitely don't want to put any meat, bones, cheese, dairy, and then oily foods like peanut butter in a small system like this. So small system, small range of materials, small volumes of materials. The next size up would be backyard or front yard, home composting or on-site composting at schools. And with this, we can add in bread, grains, as well as our vegetable and fruit waste, still the coffee grounds and the eggshells. And now we can add in leaves, which I highly recommend go into every compost bin. And then garden waste or yard waste. And we still don't want to compost meat, cheese, oils, and peanut butter in a home system of this size, because it will attract animals and it will take a really long time to break down. It might create odor. And then there's one little subset bigger than this that would be a larger home compost pile, like 3 feet by 3 feet, but I don't think many people have the capacity to do that at their houses, but I just wanted to mention that. And then we get into large composting, which goes back to the picture I showed of Martin's farm. Commercial composting at a permitted compost site accepts all types of food waste, including meat, bones, and cheese. We can do paper, and this is where we start to get a lot of waste reduction. Paper that's not recyclable, such as napkins, paper towels, paper takeout containers, compostable coffee cups, soiled pizza boxes, even waxed cardboard can go into these programs. And then there are other materials too, like wooden utensils and BPI certified compostable plastics that you shouldn't try to compost in your backyard. If you get some plasticky item that says it's certified compostable, it's meant to go into this kind of program, not into your home bin. I superimposed the little picture of the orange thermometer there to remind me to tell you that that pile there is going to get up to 140 degrees, maybe 150 or 60 degrees. And these facilities monitor the temperature carefully. And this is the difference between home composting and commercial composting. This is a hot process. It kills weed seeds and can process a large range of materials. Whereas a home composting, your bin is not going to really heat up, but it will transform that material into compost. So if you're getting jazzed up about making a huge waste reduction in your household or school or business, you too can participate in this type of composting shown here by looking at the website recyclingworksma.org, and that's our own Christy Berry, who is one of the administrators of that program, and she will be available at the end for questions, but I highly encourage visiting that website. It's got tons of resources. Next slide, please. Okay, last bit about commercial composting. I just wanted to show the commercial composting program. This happens to be at Greenfield Transfer Station. We've got 10 programs like this in Franklin County, including 3 by our own Rick Inez of our working group here. And this is a way for the individual household to, again, really cut down on the amount of trash that they are putting out at the curb or bringing to the transfer station. So some towns on the North Shore of Boston and around the Boston area are well served by different haulers that are contracted with the town. That's the word I'm looking for. So some towns in the eastern part of the state have curbside pickup, but nobody in Western Mass has curbside pickup yet because we do have mostly transfer stations. Okay, next slide, please.
Thanks, Amy. So I wanted to review with everyone the basics of how composting works. So any scale compost system of those 3 sizes that Amy mentioned needs 5 key ingredients. The first one is water. So the material in the bin or the pile should be about as damp as a wrung out sponge, and you should add water if it's not, and add water when building a pile, but add sparingly, especially in winter, because in the winter it's likely to freeze and it's not likely to evaporate much. So adding water depends on how dry your compost pile is, and if it's in the sun or not, and what time of year it is, all of that. But that's a good rule of thumb. You also need air and oxygen, as we said, for the decomposition process to succeed and not go anaerobic and produce methane. You want to mix and stir occasionally. More often means a faster finished product, but some people don't want to go and mix their compost every week. I think a minimum of once a month is recommended. And then the next ingredient that's crucial is brown materials. These are carbon-rich materials like hay, leaves, shredded paper, shredded cardboard, shredded egg cartons, things like that, that are lower in nitrogen and richer in carbon. And those need to be balanced 3 parts to 1 part with green materials, which are nitrogen rich. So green materials like, well, I'll have a list on the next page, but green materials like lawn clippings, food waste, coffee grounds, things like that. And then microorganisms, that's another key ingredient to consume the material in the bin. You want to inoculate your bin as you're building it. A way people do that is by adding soil or adding finished compost. So the things living in the soil or in that compost, you want those to be dispersed throughout your pile so that you have something to start with, and that life will flourish once it finds all of that new material to eat. So what to compost at home? Those green nitrogen-rich materials, for example, are veggies, fruit, and peels, stuff that you're not going to be able to eat. Bread, rice, pasta, and grains work. You might want to keep your pile closed off to critters if you have those in there, because they're likely to attract some critters. Coffee grounds, paper and coffee filters, and tea bags, or eggshells and grass clippings and yard waste. With yard waste, you want to make sure you're keeping weeds that have gone to seed out. And then brown materials, things like fall leaves, straw, shredded newspaper, paper egg cartons, wood chips, but not too many, especially if you're cold composting, which most people are, and they take a lot longer to decompose. Old potting soil and dead plants, make sure they didn't die from disease if you're using it in the garden. And then animal bedding, but make sure it's coming from herbivores. That could be from, livestock, or from, if you have gerbils or hamsters, things like that. But you don't want to put cat or dog waste in your compost pile because of disease concerns. And then you don't want to include meat, fish, bones, cheese, dairy, fat, grease, oils, peanut butters, or cooked foods with lots of sauces and butter. And like I said, you want to be careful of disease or insect-ridden plants, weeds, or weeds with seeds, because they might proliferate when you use them in your garden. So Amy's going to describe how to put those things all together into a pile.
Okay, I'm going to talk louder because some people said they couldn't hear me. Is that better? Thank you for all your great questions that are coming in on the chat side. It's kind of distracting because I want to answer them all, but we'll get there. So this is a fabulous one-page handout or poster from the Mass DEP, and we've given the link on the bottom for how you can pull this up on your computer. And remember, we're going to provide the link to this presentation so you don't have to go crazy making notes. So the heading of this poster is Home Composting is Easy, and it really is. The first directive here is add 3 parts browns. So Joel just covered what some of those browns are, so I'm not going to read this list, but I find this to be the #1 problem in compost bins, home compost bins, is that people are not adding enough leaves or brown carbon-rich material. Now, here in New England, we've got plenty of leaves, right? So I focus a lot on leaves in all of my educational outreach, but you can use other materials too if you don't have leaves, and you can also get leaves from neighbors who have plenty of leaves. So if you live in an apartment or you don't have any trees in your yard, you can get leaves from asking neighbors, and there are several neighborhood sharing groups online that you can find. So you want to have 3 parts brown material to 1 part green material. So the Mass DEP has come up with this easy equation to figure out the nitrogen and carbon ratio.
I don't know where they are. How long is this going to last?
Is somebody not muted? Make sure you're muted. I'm going to mute this someone I see here. So make sure you're muted when you're listening to this, because otherwise it's distracting to the other people. And thank you everyone for being here. So 3 parts browns to 1 parts green. So your green material is your food waste from your kitchen, no matter what color it is. So coffee grounds are nitrogen rich. We consider that a green material. So if you pour your compost from your kitchen out of a bowl or a pail into your home compost bin, make a little hole in the center, pour in or dump in your stuff, and then cover it up with the material in the bin, be that leaves or finished compost or whatever else you're using as a carbon-rich bulking agent there. So when you're building your bin or setting it up, or even just improving a bin or system you already have in your yard, you want to mix or layer the materials as you're setting them up. So green, brown, green, brown. And if you didn't do that, it would still compost. So I like to tell people, if you want to be a lazy composter, just fill that bin up with leaves and then keep that percentage 3 to 1. And your food waste that you keep adding will be your 1 part, and your plentiful leaves, you have to add more throughout the year, will be your 3 parts browns. And then this poster says, after every 12 inches or so, add a few shovelfuls of rich soil or compost. So you want to inoculate your bins with the microorganisms it needs to break down that material. And so if you have a sluggish bin at home, or a compost bin that's really not doing much, or you want to reinvigorate it, get it going again, this is a great way to jumpstart your existing compost bin also. And you can do it at any time. I see someone asked a question, should you add these microorganisms every spring? It's not a bad idea. But if your bin has contact with the ground, those microorganisms and worms are going to find their way into that bin regardless. And then the last direction here is keep it damp and aerated. And that just means you want to add water occasionally. So sometimes when I bring my compost pail out to my compost bin, I have a hose or a rain barrel there, and I rinse out my compost pail, and then I put that water right back into the compost bin. You can also just wet it with a hose, and especially when you're setting up a new bin, wetting each layer with a hose is a great idea. And then keeping it aerated. This is something a lot of people have questions about. When you're stirring a compost bin up, it doesn't mean that you put item A that was over here is now over there, and item B is now over here. It's not all about like mixing it up like in a blender. You just want to introduce oxygen in there. So if all you can do is lift up some of the material with a pitchfork, that's good. That's better than not doing that. So it's you know, if you have a tall, skinny compost bin like the ones that we sell, you can just get your pitchfork down in there and just dig around in 4 different places, getting that air down in there, and that will be sufficient for turning it. And if you can turn it better than that with a backhoe or some teenagers with shovels, even better. And then on the right side, there's some more directions about things not to compost, which Joel just went over. But again, this is a great one-pager to educate people in your household or kids or yourself about how to compost. Next slide, please. So when you're setting up your bin, I just have some pictures here of an Earth Machine compost bin. I've filled it up about a third of the way with some fall leaves. And then in the middle picture, I'm adding some finished compost, and you can see an eggshell in there that is still kind of whole. This came from another compost bin. And then the last picture there on the right is of a bucket that I had collected some pumpkins last fall from around my yard. I put them in the bucket with the intention of restarting this compost bin, and then it rained. Well, you need to put water in there anyway. So in the picture, you can see a lot of pumpkin-y water as well as the pumpkins going into the compost bin. And the next spring, those pumpkins were pretty much gone. So the alternating layers of carbon-rich material and nitrogen-rich material, the green and the brown, really helps to speed things up. Next slide, please. So a lot of people ask, should I put my compost bin in the shade or in the sun? And there are so many differing opinions on that. It just boils down to, it doesn't really matter. If you're in a desert, I wouldn't put it in the sun, but here in New England, a little sun and heating up is not going to really hurt our compost. It's going to help our compost. So if it's in a real sunny spot and it's getting beaten down by those rays in the summer, add more water. It's all just about the water. The debate is about, is it going to dry out too much? So check out your bin, add some water if it needs more water, if you're in a sunny spot. And then, like any project, it's great to assemble the materials you're going to use before you even start. And so it's fun to kind of accumulate different browns and greens from your gardening projects or from your neighbor's gardening projects, and see all that material easily going together in layers is very satisfying. Next slide, please. Oh, and one more thing. You want to make sure that where you place your compost bin is near a water source. So some people place their compost bin so far from their house, it becomes a hike to get out there with your food waste. And if you do it properly, it's not going to smell. So you could put it a little closer to your house, and it would be great to put it in a place where you have a hose nearby, so that if you really need to add a lot of water, you can easily do that. Okay, so as I said earlier, a great tip is every time you add that food waste, make a little hole in the center, dump it in the center, and bury or cover the food waste with leaves or brown materials. Now, I can't be stopped. If I go to a friend's house and they have a compost bin, I'm looking in it. And so I always look in people's compost bins, only with permission. And when I pull the lid off, oftentimes there's like a column of insects that comes up. And I say, well, that's because you dumped and ran. Don't dump and run. I'll say it in the present tense. If you just dump the food waste in there and don't cover it up with anything, you're going to get more insects on top of there. Insects are great. It just makes it a little bit icky for some people. So you're going to get better, faster results and less insects if you cover that food waste every time. You can keep a pitchfork near your bin or a small garden tool. It doesn't have to be an involved process to just make a little hole, dump it in, and cover it up with some leaves. A lot of people are asking, even on our chat here, how often to stir or turn the pile. The more you turn it, the better, faster results you're going to get. So some people might do it once a week. Some people might do it every time they add food waste. But some people never stir or turn their bins, and that is okay too. They're just going to have slower results. So if you're adding a lot of food waste, stir it more often. If it smells bad, like ammonia or cat pee or just a bad smell, do 1 and 2 more often. Always be sure to bury your food waste, or cover, not really bury, cover. And always, and stir it more often, and you will have less odor. If you do have an ammonia smell, that means your compost has gone anaerobic and not enough air has been getting into there. And if you add some leaves and stir it more often, you'll be in better shape. The leaves actually help with the aeration because they have little air pockets in them if they're crumbly. And then you'll know the compost is finished when it looks and smells like fresh, clean, crumbly soil, and it is dark brown in appearance, and you can use it on your gardens, and it's very forgiving. There's no really correct recipe to using that material. Next slide, please. Oh, and there's a picture of finished compost. That's how it should look. So kitchen compost pails are a great way to make composting even easier. Sometimes I see people who have like a little bowl on their counter and that's their compost. If that works for you, that's fine. But it's going to be easier for you if you have something with a lid that will help keep down fruit flies and odors. And so the Franklin County Solid Waste District brought these pails into Massachusetts, working with a manufacturer in Ontario, and they're made out of recycled content plastic. And they are sold throughout the state. There's a few different types out there, but this is the one that I really like. It's called Sure Close. And so if you don't have access to any of these programs in the state of Massachusetts, you can always just go online and buy a Sure Close pail. And there are lots of different types of compost pails, and lots of people love their little stainless steel compost pails with the filter in the lid. Those are great too, but these are cheaper. And they're made from recycled plastic, and they are recyclable. It has a vented lid so that moisture can evaporate, which greatly helps with odor. And you don't get that buildup on the lid of the compost pail of water as materials are kind of letting their moisture go. And it's a great little pail. So you can get them from Franklin County Solid Waste District. If you live in Franklin County, you can get them through Worcester County Conservation District. Contact Joel, and he'll help you find where to get one. And hopefully you can make it even easier for yourself. Next slide, please.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about a few other resources available to you in different bin types, some of which we have available through our different organizations. So Earth Machine composters have been made available at a discounted rate in 150 towns in Massachusetts. So that's pretty incredible. Of all the towns we have, this is pretty widely available. In Franklin County, you can buy them at cost, and depending where you are, for $25 to $45, which is a really good discount. And they're about 33 inches tall and 32 inches wide. They have an access point at the top and the bottom, and that allows you to take the finished compost out of the bottom more readily. And then they have air vents, and they're black, and that can help keep the heat up if that's what you're going for. And you can control that by putting it in the sun or the shade. But they're readily available, and you can contact Amy in particular, or I, or any of us on the panel here, if you can't find where to get one of those in your town, and we'll help you out. Our conservation district also sells bins. They're lobster trap material, so they're highly resistant to rust. They're 3 feet cubed, or 1 meter cubed. So each panel is $16. So you know, one, depending on whether or not you want to shut off the bottom for animals who might be digging in, it's 5 or 6 panels. And you can contact me if you're interested in those, and they're a great open air composting route as well. Another option, which is either free or at low cost, is to either go get pallets or cheap wood from your local hardware store and create your own compost bin with wood. You want to use untreated wood because what part of the treatment of wood is fungicide, and you want fungus in your compost pile, so you don't want that fungicide leaching into your compost pile and killing the beneficial microorganisms. So you want to make sure it's not treated wood. Because it's not treated, it won't last you more than a decade. I would think probably less than that, but that's okay, because the wood will start to add to the compost pile itself. So there's a few links here that are helpful if you would like some instructions and how-to videos to create your own compost pile from pallets or cheap wood.
Somehow we're unmuted.
And Amy's going to talk a little bit about another strategy here that's super easy.
Okay, so I mentioned very strongly that you should save leaves in the fall. And this is actually a way to save leaves while composting. So if you have a lot of leaves in your yard, you can just take some chicken wire or hardware cloth and make a circle of metal wire. And it doesn't have a lid or a base, and just keep adding your leaves to this cold composting system, and after a few years you will have some soil in the bottom of that chicken wire structure that can be used for composting in your gardens or mulching around shrubs and trees. And this is from Pat Lightman's article in the Greenfield Recorder. She's one of my gurus, along with Ann McGovern, who is on our call here answering questions valiantly in the chat room. Ann McGovern of Mass
Excellent.
is a compost expert, so I thank her for all her work in this. Okay, somebody is not muted. Can everybody make sure that you are muted if you're participating in this? That is a little button in the bottom left corner. Put your mouse over your bottom left corner and click mute, and then we won't all hear you. Next slide, please. For Joel.
Another few steps that you can take are to participate in some of our future in-person workshops. Rick Innes, who is on the call, is planning to offer some small, limited space, socially distant workshops in June. He's thinking probably June 10, 11, and 12, or somewhere around those dates. And for those who are interested in those workshops, they can reach out to us by email, and we will send a follow-up with that in the email that we send after this Zoom webinar. But Rick is an excellent resource, amazing person, been advocating for composting in Western Massachusetts for decades, and he runs the commercial compost operation in Orange, Clearview Composting. But he'll also discuss home-style bins and in general the composting process with demonstrations on his site, at his site there. And we'll also have home bins available for sale at those workshops. So for those who are interested, that's going to be in the future, and we hope to do more as a working group like that as things open up a little bit more and we're able to have bigger groups and workshops. I'm also hoping to and planning to have a few in-person workshops in collaboration with the Regional Environmental Council in Worcester at some of the community gardens. So we'll include information about that in a follow-up email as well. And obviously another next step you can take is to buy a home compost bin, either from us or from your town, or making one yourself, or there's a variety of other places you can buy them. You can contact me or Amy or your city or town administrator office to get started. And then also make sure to make note on your calendar to save leaves in the fall if you're planning to start a compost bin, because there's an abundance of leaves then, and then when you want them the following summer, you might realize, oh crap, I sent them all to the town, and now they have all my carbon-rich material, and I have to find leaves somewhere else. So make sure to keep them in a pile if you're planning to compost, so you can add that important brown material to your bin throughout the year. And I wanted to also mention, as a district, if you want in-person help with setting up or revamping your compost pile, or if you want soil testing, or you can get compost quality testing as well through University of Maine, or just general garden planning assistance, I can be available for site visits for free to help with composting, especially if you're going to buy one of our compost bins. I could deliver it to your site and help you set it up. And we also offer soil testing through the UMass testing service, and I'll come out to your site, and it's $40 per test, and I'll help you interpret your results when they come in. And Christy's going to mention a few other resources that are available to you through our working group.
Hi, everyone. Thank you to Joel and Amy. There's so much great information. And Amy mentioned it, but I wanted to give a solid hat tip to Ann McGovern, who's on our call today. She is a the composting guru for the Mass DEP, and you can find her information online as well. And we've got the mass.gov link a little further down this slide. But at the top here is Amy's contact information. Also on the call, who will be answering in the Q&A in just a moment, is Rick Innes of Clearview Composting. You can find his site, Clearview Composting, on Facebook, or his phone number is there. He's a longtime member of our working group and a strong advocate for composting in the region and food waste diversion. I wanted to take just a quick moment to mention Recycling Works in Massachusetts. So this is an organization, a program that my organization administers through the DEP, funded by the DEP, that is offering free waste assistance to businesses and institutions across the state. So for any of your workplaces, or if you own your own business, we can offer similar assistance to what Joel and Amy offer for residences. We offer for businesses, and that's for all materials, not just food waste, but we're happy to help you set up waste diversion programs or improve the ones you have. And we also offer commercial compost site assistance. So if you have a compost site and you are considering adding material from off-site, or expanding your compost site, or if you know someone with a farm who wants to do commercial level composting, we can offer technical assistance for that as well. My contact info is there, and you're welcome to reach out. There's a link here to a video from Seeds of Solidarity. As I mentioned at the beginning, Deb Habib from Seeds of Solidarity is another longtime member of our working group. And this video, I actually watched it and employed one of these techniques in my own garden the other day, but using cardboard for no-till gardening, cardboard and compost, which is a really great technique. Seeds of Solidarity is a strong advocate for no-till, which helps keep more of that carbon in your soil. You can go to mass.gov and type home composting, and you'll probably get Anne's information and some other resources. And then finally at the bottom, we didn't go into it much today, but if you're interested in more about vermicomposting, you can ask our own Amy Donovan, who has lots of info, or go to www.wormladies.com for a fantastic resource out of Charleston, Rhode Island, that also has vermicomposting materials for sale. Next slide, please, Joel. Thank you. So we wanted to say a big thank you to the Mount Grace Land Conservation Trust and the Greater Quabbin Food Alliance. If you missed it at the start, that's what we are. We are part of a subgroup of the Greater Quabbin Food Alliance. We are the Food Waste Reduction and Composting Working Group. For more information on the Greater Quabbin Food Alliance events and to join the listserv, you can go to quabbinfoodalliance.wordpress.com. Find out more information about this small but mighty group of people. There are other working groups related to our food systems, one on supply and production for farms, another on regulations and policy, and I don't remember at the moment what the other two are. I believe there are 5 total. And then wanted to thank also Seeds of Solidarity Farm and Drawdown Montague, who are the other members of our working group that are not participating as presenters in this call today. And finally, we're going to move on to our Q&A. So there were a lot of fantastic questions. Chris has been compiling those, and I think is going to try to present them for the ones that overlap in some of the bigger themes first. And if we don't get to your question, feel free to stick around. Hopefully you will anyway, and then you can ask it again in a bit. It is 12:52, and I know we did this at lunchtime, so we acknowledge that some of you may need to jump off, but like we said earlier, this has been recorded and will be available to attendees, and we also will be sharing the slides with attendees after the fact. So Rick is joining us by phone, so we may hear his voice, but we won't see a video from him, and then Amy and Joel are also available for questions, and I'll let Chris take it over to start with the questions. Thank you all so much for being here. We're astounded at how many folks are here, and really glad that we'll be able to help you have a more successful composting experience.
All right, so as noted, we had a lot of questions in chat, which is always great. And thank you again to Anne for helping catch and answer them as they went along. so there's a couple main themes that I've seen a couple different questions talking about, and then we'll move into more specific ones. But there was some questions primarily talking about navigating, wanting to use the compost, while also wondering if it's okay to keep adding new vegetables and fruit, or how do you kind of segregate between older compost that is ready to be used in garden pots versus some of the newer things that you just put in. So
I would love to answer that one. May I?
Yeah, go for it.
So the reason why I really love that earth machine is that it has that door in the bottom where you can shovel out finished compost. So as you're doing yard projects in any season, spring, summer, or fall, not winter, you can shovel out just a little bit, like if you're planting a couple of plants or more. Another thing you can do is if it's finished, like if it's mostly finished compost, you can easily unscrew the bottom and just lift the whole thing off in one unit, shovel out all that material, and then put it back together. And so it is a little bit of a challenge to harvest some bins, but you can always get a shovel and, after you eat your lunch, go out there with a friend or by yourself and push aside what's on the top. Like if you have an open bin, push aside what's on the top, save that to keep composting, and then get down to the good stuff and shovel that out. I saw that somebody asked if you're continuing to compost, should you have 2 bins? And if you can and you want to, that is an excellent way to do it. At my house, I have a winter bin and a summer bin that doesn't necessarily correspond exactly with those seasons, but the winter bin is near my back door so that I can access it throughout the colder months. And the summer bin is near the vegetable garden so that we can kind of throw things in there that didn't work out in the garden. And so each bin has a chance to rest and finish up composting, but that is kind of advanced. So if you just want 1 bin, you can harvest it from the bottom while the top is still actively composting with new food waste being added, and that's the beauty of that earth machine. But if you have another kind of bin, you can just shovel it around and shovel out the finished compost.
All right, so another question that I've been seeing is some questions asking about where it's okay to have compost bins. So I've seen a question about kind of like apartment or city living. There was a question about, is it okay to have a compost bin in a garage or having one closer to the house? If any of you guys want to answer with that.
Well, I have my compost bin right outside my back door. And I haven't had any problems with that. But some people do have, bears that come to their yard or rats. So for bears, it would be any animal, it would be important to have a lot of leaves and like bulking material so that your percentage of food waste is low and your percentage of carbon-rich bulking materials is high. Another strategy to deal with bears in particular is to use powdered lime, not pelletized, but powdered lime in and around your bin. If they get that in their nose, they don't like it and they're discouraged. So also keeping really stinky foods out, like, cantaloupe, when you cut it, it starts to smell rotten pretty quickly. I have a bear who visits my bin and I don't put cantaloupe in my bin because it's so fragrant. And with rats, somebody asked about rats. Again, lots of bulking material, lots and lots of carbon. Make sure that your bin isn't, like if you're using an enclosed bin, is the bottom in place? Are there holes? Try to patch up any holes. And you can, enclose your entire bin with a chicken wire support or just make a bin like Joel's. If you had that Worcester County Conservation District bin with the piece on the bottom too, there's not really many places where rodents can get in because those little holes in the lobster trap are pretty small. I know they can get through, but how big are those holes, Joel?
I think they're about an inch. So they're not, chipmunks don't get through. Mice potentially could, and smaller really small critters like that. But the idea is to keep most of the things that would be passed out.
And then also, if you want to reinforce any bin or any area with material, the material called hardware cloth that has very small holes, you can buy it with really small holes, would be a great way to reinforce that to keep animals out.
If I could chime in here, I would like to echo the endorsement of hardware cloth. It's not cheap, but it is a really useful material for both for bins and for screening finished compost, which I think we had a question about earlier. So
yeah,
Thanks,
so you
Rick.
can make a screener with some wood around it, like a support, like a box with just 4 pieces of wood, and nail hardware cloth, which is not cloth, by the way. Took me a while to figure that out 20 years ago. Like, is it cloth?
heavy,
No.
heavy screening, basically.
That's right. So yeah, so somebody asked about screening. So you can make a simple little screen and then kind of shake it to get the smaller materials to go out into your wheelbarrow. And then the larger materials, like somebody mentioned, eggshells and bigger pieces of wood, can go right back into your compost bin.
Yeah, and that's a way to use compost that may not be completely finished all throughout, right? That was an answer to one of the questions.
Right.
You can, I know that when we do that at the community gardens, we filter out some of those bigger things and put them back in. And you know, if they're really like big pieces of eggshell, you can crush those up. You know, take the chance that you have to make some of those finer, so they'll biodegrade more quickly. But that's especially true for smaller operations. I know what Rick has going. It's a little bit more of a streamlined process than that.
All right. Right now in the chat, there's some really good conversation going on around the use of newspaper being done in composting. We had some earlier questions about is it okay to compost? Let's see, we had paper towels as well as regular paper.
Uh-oh. What happened?
Chris, maybe say that again, the last part of that question.
Yeah, it sort of faded out there.
Sorry about that. We had some questions about whether it is okay to compost both, let's see, we have paper filters, paper towels, and paper in general.
Maybe Rick, can you take that one?
Well, yeah, what I always tell people is that if you have paper items that are acceptable in recycling and are in a condition that it would be okay to go into the recycling, then recycling is your best bet. However, there are plenty of other paper items that come out of a household that can't be recycled, excuse me, and they are perfectly fine in composting. Coffee filters are a classic example. You know, it's if you're putting coffee grounds into your compost, it's much easier just to put the paper filter in as well. Paper towels and paper napkins and so on, if they're food soiled and not soiled with something that you wouldn't want in your compost pile, they're perfectly fine. They compost very well also.
And those add that key brown material that's often lacking in a home compost bin. So it's if you don't have leaves, but you use paper towels every day for your food, that can be a great source of brown material to balance things out.
Yeah, exactly. It's sort of, you have to sort of see what you have to work with, and leaves are great, but if you don't have enough leaves, then the paper is fine too.
So I have one thing to add to that. On June 3rd, in most of the area newspapers, I realize there's some people here from New York City and Ontario, but the Daily Hampshire Gazette, the Greenfield Recorder, and the Athol Daily News, on June 3rd, which is next Wednesday, I believe, there's going to be a 32-page insert called Reduce, Reuse, Recycle, and it's everything under the sun about waste reduction and proper disposal, recycling, and composting. The Daily Hampshire Gazette produces that with us, the Springfield MRF Advisory Board, every year. It's our 13th edition, and the Gazette actually put an ad in the guide this year that proudly states that all of the inks used on their newspapers are water-based. So a few years ago, they were soy-based, S-O-Y, soy, and now they're water-based, even better. So it is completely safe to compost all of those newspapers that are printed at that Northampton, Massachusetts facility at the Daily Hampshire Gazette. And that includes the Montague Reporter and the West County Independent, the Valley Advocate also, as well as the ones that I mentioned, and the Amherst Bulletin. So we've got a plethora of good, yummy newspaper to use around here.
Going off of that as well, continuing the conversation, this question about tea bags, from my understanding, as long as they're biodegradable, and you just want to be careful about if they've got like a staple or anything like that, but I believe tea bags are good to compost.
Yeah, we've always composted tea bags and told people to compost tea bags, but I don't know if many of you saw the recent news that many tea bags actually have plastic in the lining. So it is a microplastic. It's not going to cause any huge problems, but if you're a purist, you might want to keep those out or do some more research on the brands that don't have the plastic in them. I've always put tea bags in my worm bins, and the worms will consume the tea bag, the tea, the string, and the paper, and leave behind the little staple. So it is consumable. And Rick, you want to add to that?
Well, I was just going to say that what we found in our composting operation, we do not worry about getting tea bags mixed in with the incoming food waste. What we have found is that about 50% of the time, the tea that's in the bag composts, and we're left with the bag itself, which we remove at the screening stage, basically. And I've never worried about it because in my observation, the bags that don't break down stay in one piece, and therefore I'm not too worried about fragments getting into the finished compost. So, you know, I think it would be an individual choice. People might want to do it differently in a small home, more of a home composting setting, but.
All right, and that was actually a very good transition. We had a couple questions about worm bins. We had a couple questions about, is it okay to put eggshells in worm bins? Citrus and leaves were the three.
Okay, so I have been worm composting continually for 13 years. I absolutely love it. It's one of my favorite things in the world. And worms need calcium to reproduce. And since we've got them trapped in this worm bin that they don't want to leave, they want to stay there. They're happy captives. They need that calcium, and they're not going to be able to get it from other places in the soil or in the decomposing leaf litter on the forest floor. So, what I do is when I open an egg, I rinse it and I put it on a plate in my kitchen, and I just let them dry there. And then when that plate is full, I put them in a paper bag. And then when the paper bag is full, I crush them and I add them to my worm bin. And that method is great for worms because it allows them to reproduce heartily, and it also gives them the grit that they need to chew their food because they're like chickens. They don't have teeth, so they need something in there to act as teeth. And then there were a few questions in the chat room about this too. If you followed my method I just described for your regular compost, you'd never see an eggshell in your finished compost. It would all be, like a powder that would decompose much more readily. So that method could be used for home composting or worm composting. And then just to finish up on this question, yes, you can put leaves in there, but you might get other critters in there that, are part of the composting system, so they're fine, but just be aware. And then what was the other thing? Citrus?
Yep.
Worms don't really like citrus too much. No, I said that wrong. They do like citrus, but if you add a lot of it, like if you're a big orange eater and put all your orange peels in there, it will become too acidic over time. And Joel, do you have the slide that we have on hold about vermicomposting in case there were a lot of questions? There it is. So this is my worm Bible, this is the worm Bible. Worms Eat My Garbage. And this is the 35th anniversary updated edition that just came out a couple years ago. So you can get that anywhere online, etc. But you can also get a really cheap copy of the previous editions, which are just as good, for less than $5 online. And this is a classroom worm bin yes and no list that I made. It says yes, compost fruits, vegetables, eggshells, coffee grounds, and paper filters, and newspaper. Do not compost in a worm compost bin. Meat, cheese, bread. I only say that because of mold. Crackers, because this is for schools and kids eat a lot of crackers. And pineapple. You would never know that, but pineapple has an enzyme that can hurt worms in an enclosed worm bin. So it's fine to put pineapple in your home composting bin outdoors. It's a larger system, but in a small enclosed system, I say keep the pineapple out.
Could I add a couple real quick points to follow up on that?
Please.
On the issue of calcium, it's worth noting that calcium is also a very good thing to have in compost going into garden soils, because plants need calcium too. Calcium is important in their developing their structure and so forth. So calcium is a good thing. It's just a question of a way of reducing it to small enough particles that it actually functions well in the compost. And the other thing I just wanted to mention is on the citrus question. This is something I've run into in troubleshooting people's home composting bins. I've run into it at least a dozen times over the years. And there is a way to fix it, to deal with it. You just have to pay attention to what the mix is that's going into your pile and what the pH level, the acidity level that is resulting. For composting to work really well, the pH of the whole mix needs to be preferably between like a no lower than 5.5 and no higher than 7.5. And especially like lemons can take you rapidly below the 5.5. But you can add ground limestone to your compost mix to raise the pH. Or if you have a wood stove and burn only clean materials, you can add wood ash as well.
Which is great, because we did have a couple questions about ash, so thank you there. Is it beneficial to add worms to a regular compost pile, or is it more only for vermicomposting?
I say no to that. It's a little frustrating because there's a lot of conflicting information out there about red worms. Red worms are great champion composters, but they're not native to our area. So some people are concerned that they are going to start eating the duff layer on the forest floors around here. Oh, and speaking of the duff layer, total tangent, somebody asked a great question that I didn't remember to say the answer to in my regular presentation. What if I don't have finished compost to add to my compost bin? And the answer is you could go to the forest and you might have some woods near you and put aside some of the top layers of leaves, dig a little hole, get some of that forest floor and bring it back to your compost bin and add that. That's what you should do if you don't have access to finished compost or some good healthy garden soil to add to your bin. But going back to the worm composting question, do I add worms to my compost bin? And then somebody else also asked, do you put your finished worm compost into your worm bin, into your outdoor compost bin? I say no, unless you have stuff you want to finish up composting or something. You can add finished worm castings or worm compost directly to your soil, mix it in, put a little bit in a hole of a plant that you're transplanting and use it that way. It's not necessary to add worms to a compost bin to keep it composting. You will get worms coming in there naturally. Somebody also asked about a tumbler, compost tumbler. And my personal opinion, this is my personal opinion, is that you're cutting that composter off from the natural world by enclosing it, an outdoor tumbler composter. I like an earth machine, or like the style that Joel's organization sells, because moisture and microorganisms and worms can come and go as needed or as they please. And I find that some of these tumblers are not in contact with the ground, and they can get pretty hot. They can get very frozen in the winter and hard to turn. So it's not my favorite way to compost. I know that some people have no other choice. And I think Rick wants to add to this.
On the question of worms, I just wanted to add our philosophy in terms of our obviously somewhat larger operation than we're talking about today, is that our piles are in ground contact, and the earlier and mid stages of our compost piles are way too hot from all the microbe activity, so the worms are not interested in the piles. But what we find is that when we get to the later stages, we get 2 invasions of worms in succession, and they've become a really helpful indicator for us.
Uh-oh. Did you go away? Are you still there? Okay, we might have lost Rick. Chris, can we answer the question from Joni McPhee? I'll let you read it.
No one has mentioned compost piles. Why not?
You can certainly compost in a pile, and tons of people do that. But I do find that if people are a beginner at this, or they just want to keep it neat and contained, a compost bin that is designed for this works faster for a novice or a busy mom like me. And it just makes it easier, and in the earth machine, you get the finished product coming out the bottom, and it keeps out pests, it keeps out rodents, or mostly keeps out rodents. It's resistant to rodents and wildlife. It's not foolproof. So it's more accessible for the average person, but you can certainly compost in a pile. And you can compost in an open pile, like in a pallet bin that you make at home. You're just going to have a lot more animal visitors.
Definitely. With animals, like, depending on where you are, I know, if you're in the tropics, for example, which I don't think people are on this call, but or in a more urban environment, rats are a really big concern. And, you definitely don't want that. But if you're mostly composting leaves, like a lot of people just have piles, and that's fine, but one other benefit of having them enclosed is that they won't blow away. So there's a lot of benefits to having things enclosed, and there's different solutions depending on the contents of your pile of your bin.
All right, we've definitely we've answered a lot of worm bin questions right now. I think that there were some other ones that were non-vermiculture related that I think we're going to pivot towards. But if there's interest, this could definitely be a potential for another webinar more focused on vermiculture and answering some of these questions. But let's pivot to chickens for a second. We had a couple questions regarding composting both chicken manure and chicken bedding.
Christy?
Yeah, I can definitely take these.
She's our chicken expert.
Yeah, for those of you on the call who wouldn't have any reason to know this, but my other business is helping teach people how to keep their own backyard chickens. So I have a lot of experience with chicken bedding and an egg-spert. Yes, that's true. The chickeness, if you will. So there was also a question there about egg cartons that I was looking at. So first of all, chicken bedding is perfect for your compost bin, with one exception, and that is that if you're in an urban setting and have a small bin, like say the earth machine or a tumbler, you're going to fill that space volume-wise very quickly. Even a typical urban flock size is about 6 birds, and anyone outside of an urban setting might have a few more. There are two different ways of collecting the bedding, either all of the bedding together. So this is the poop, which is really nitrogen rich. Poop is a very strong green. And the bedding, which is your shavings or your straw, which is a brown. If you're collecting that all together, it's already pre-balanced for the most part, depending on how often you're collecting it, with your browns and your greens. And it's a really great way to get a lot of browns into your compost if you might not otherwise have a lot of that brown material. So that's good. But if you have a limited space, like I said, you'll probably, a typical 4x4 chicken coop has about maybe 15 to 30 gallons volume wise of bedding that you'll be putting into your composter, and those shavings take a little while to break down, so so you just have to keep that in mind. There are a couple services that will pick up animal bedding from residential areas, so we can, if you have questions about that, feel free to email any of us directly and we can connect you with that. But otherwise, if you have the space, it is ideal to put in your compost bin, and the same goes for any other herbivorous animal bedding. So this is if you have rabbits and you use a wood-based or pellet or shaving bedding. We have indoor rabbits at our house, and we use the wood pellets that we use for our pellet stove, and all of that, their poop, pee, and the pellets go straight in our compost bin. And the same goes for, and this is one that most people wouldn't think of, but if you have a gerbil or a hamster and you have shavings in their cage or container, or newspaper or anything like that, all of that can go right into the compost bin too. So that's a yes for that material. The other thing that someone had asked was about egg cartons. So if you're talking, so styrofoam, no, that's trash, unfortunately. But if you have the pulpy paper egg cartons, they can be composted in your compost bin. Some of them have been treated with things with antibacterial treatments to keep the eggs cleaner and you know, food safe. I personally don't think that's necessary. I don't even wash my eggs, but that's a more European way of doing it. And I know exactly where they came from, and I just collected them yesterday, so they're really fresh. But for store-bought eggs, those egg cartons may have materials in them that that prohibit the breakdown in some way. So someone had mentioned using them for seedlings, and I also have found that my seedlings do not do well in little egg carton containers, and I think that may be why. So, but I have put egg cartons in my compost, and certainly at a commercial compost setting, anything that's big, if you're turning it really often and if you've shredded up, then it'll break down sufficiently. So there are your chicken answers. If you have other chicken questions, Yardbirds, Backyard Chickens, that's me. Carry on.
All right. I think that was really the only chicken questions I saw. We did have a couple questions about cat litter and waste. Generally, as a rule of thumb, I don't believe it's compostable. I know that there's issues with pathogens within cat litter, whether it's Giardia or Toxoplasma. I know there's a couple other ones. Typically, you want to kind of avoid keeping that anywhere near something that you would be eating.
Yeah, so there are a couple of special compost bins that are manufactured for pet waste and meat. One of them is called a solar cone or a green cone, and it's a little more pricey than some of the other compost bins. But if you have these animals and you want to really not throw away their waste, you can get biodegradable kitty litter. Make sure you've researched it's really good stuff. And this small system is one that you bury in your yard and you never harvest it. So you never use the finished compost, and you should site it away from your vegetable garden or your well, because it is gonna contain those pathogens. And then you use it for a few, I don't know how long, years or months, and then you move it to another location once it gets filled up. And it's called the solar cone because it's designed so that the sun hits the part of the compost bin that's above the ground, and it kind of transmits that heat down into the ground to help break down that material. So that's the only thing I know of for pet waste, like cats and dogs. Cat waste does contain pathogens. So like Chris said, it's very dangerous to have it around food sources. And I think most women and parents know that pregnant women should not be handling cat waste. I'm not a doctor, but that's what I've always heard. And we need to keep pet waste out of commercial compost. So there's been some conflicting information out there. Even from my organization a few years ago, one of my towns insisted on allowing kitty litter in their commercial compost dumpster. Martin's Farm okayed it, but it soon became one of my biggest regrets because the kitty litter was that blue crystally stuff, and people would put their whole plastic bag in there, and then the overlying concerns about pathogens were just too great. So we nixed that after a couple of years. But that is what it is. It's unfortunate.
All right, we had a question about composting weeds.
So Rick might be able to answer this one too, but they say you can compost spring weeds. So that would be weeds that have not gone to seed. Obviously not dandelions at this time of year have gone to seed. But if you're going around pulling out weeds in your yard, look at them. If they don't have any seeds and they don't spread by vines and runners, you can compost weeds effectively. If you don't care if you have weed seeds in your compost, like if you're not going to do much gardening with the finished compost, you could put weeds in there. You just have to realize that the seeds are not going to be destroyed by the home composting process. It does not get hot enough, and that's okay. But if you want to kill weed seeds, it would have to go through a hot composting process. Oh, and Chris, there was one more question about the cold composting method with the leaves. Somebody said, why only leaves in the chicken wire enclosure? And that's just for ease of, it's just easy, it works. But you can certainly put other garden waste in there for sure. It's just really kind of intended for leaves. And then the other thing about leaves that we didn't really get into too much is that some people say that oak leaves don't compost well. Some people say it's fine. So if you want a really quick compost, my favorite type of leaves to use is maple leaves. And they're plentiful around here. So if you could avoid oak leaves, you might have a quicker compost result. But if you have to compost oak leaves, just go for it.
All right. We had a couple questions about containers in general, in terms of, is it okay to use different types of, say, like plastic Tupperwares, garbage cans, things like that to compost, as opposed to just the bins that we mentioned earlier?
I think it's fine, as long as it has holes in it and that material can get properly aerated. There is one tumbling composter that's pretty effective, that's like a big 55-gallon drum that's supported in the middle, and then you could just flip this whole 55-gallon drum over to mix up the material. I always worry about what's happening to the worms inside, if there are any. But yes, some people compost very successfully with found items around their house, like old trash cans. And by the way, speaking of old trash cans, when I moved into my house, the elderly owners of the house had passed away, so the family didn't want a lot of useful things like trash cans, and so we inherited like 6 trash cans. And that's what I use for my leaves, not trash, not for trash, for leaves. So I use a covered trash can right next to my compost bin, so that I always have the leaves right there, and I can add a few handfuls now and then throughout the year.
I see we just had a question about grass clippings. Personally, I've just left my grass clippings on the lawn themselves, and they'll break down and incorporate pretty well. But I believe grass clippings are fine for home composting as well.
Yeah, again, like, you're not going to kill all the weed seeds, but it is a great material to compost. So if you have other ways of suppressing weeds, like with the cardboard mulching method that's described in the video that's on the resources page on this presentation, you're going to have weeds if you garden, you know weeds are part of gardening, and most of us by September are full of weeds anyway in our gardens. So you're going to have weeds no matter what you do. But like Chris said, the best way to deal with grass clippings is to let them go back onto the earth and compost in place.
Can I answer the question about garlic mustard? So invasive species like garlic mustard in general, the question was, if I pull garlic mustard that's flowered and put it in my compost bin, can it still grow seeds if I've seen my Japanese knotweed keep growing? Or like I've seen my Japanese knotweed. So some invasive species like Japanese knotweed can grow from their cut roots or parts of the plant. A lot of plants can do that. Garlic mustard generally doesn't do that well, especially if it's been buried. You know, if you just lay the pulled garlic mustard on top of your compost pile, it's likely that some of them might be able to reach maturity. If the garlic mustard is early in the flowering stage and none of them have started to seed, I think you're safe to compost it. But otherwise, I would put it in the trash because those seeds are going to mature slow. Like some of the seeds might mature and you might get garlic mustard seed in your compost. But in general, if you get things much before, for example, before they flowered and there aren't seeds available, that's not a bad input. I don't know if there's other ideas or opinions on that. Amy or Rick, but
I'm laughing because I just made a mistake on the chat room, so sorry.
That's all right.
By the way, Rick had his phone got disconnected, but he just rejoined us, so he's back on the call.
And I'll say with regards to invasive species, if you have questions, my contact is available on the PowerPoint here. That's something that we do as a district, is provide planning assistance for people with invasive species issues. And if you have want a forest management plan or broader assistance, we can connect you with the people in the same office that we're in with the USDA who can help with that.
All right, we just had a question about chemically treated grass for composting as well. Is that an all right practice, or?
I don't think that the pesticides will break down in the home compost process, but I am not an expert on that. If is Rick with us? He might know more than I. That's a tough one. Again, you know, you do have the option to just let the grass clippings fall where they fall and not put them in compost. So first, do no harm should be a good guiding principle with using chemically treated grass, or consider not chemically treating it. No judgment, no judgment.
Yeah, well, what I can offer there is that Clearview does not really actively advertise that we take grass clippings. We tend to want to just take them from people that we've talked to about it, so we have some feel that they're not putting anything noxious on their grass. But there've been in the recent history of composting, there've been some pretty much big horror stories about grass clippings that had more persistent chemicals mixed with them, typically from golf courses and such. And that caused one company in particular to have to temporarily go out of business and then reorganize itself with a new business model, basically.
Wow.
So it is an issue to be very, very careful about.
All right, we've had a couple questions about oil-based foods, if they're more vegetable oil versus animal oil. Is there a difference there? If you guys want to, I know we talked about it a little bit, but maybe expand a little bit about why we should avoid composting too many types of oily products.
I've just always heard that well, two things. For home composting or on-site composting at a school, kids eat a lot of peanut butter. So peanut butter and oily foods like salad dressings are definitely a no-no in a worm bin because that oil persists and it can affect the worms. And worms are kind of delicate when they're just in a bin that's enclosed. And then in a home composting bin, I've heard to keep all protein out. So that would include tofu and eggs and things like that. I don't know if that's as important as keeping out oily things because the oils just don't break down in a home compost bin. There's not enough heat and biological activity. But for commercial composting, you can put any kind of food in. You could put salad dressings and, well, we don't want a lot of liquid, but peanut butter and things like that in those larger scale. Right, Rick?
Yeah, basically that's correct. Although it's very much a question of however much you're putting in, it needs to be well mixed, very well mixed with the other materials in the mixture, because the oily stuff, if it gets in pockets, it doesn't compost well at all. So you have to sort of disperse it throughout the pile, and make sure that it's a small percentage of the total mix. And if you do that, we routinely get in oily, mostly vegetable oils, of course, but various food-related oily materials, and they do compost okay, but only, as I say, only if you pay attention to the mixing.
And he's talking about a commercial composting facility that's huge volume.
Yeah, our to give people an idea of scale, our individual composters are 10 cubic yards, which is about 10 times the size of about the largest home composter you would ever see. So.
I also I wanted to add, I was reading back through the chat because Anne had to leave, but she had commented earlier about oils too, that I couldn't find specifically this one, but something about the oils can coat various things. So in some cases they can coat the good organisms that you want doing stuff, or they can just coat materials and make it harder for it to break down. And she also pointed out that meat and dairy can encourage maggots from houseflies, which can carry disease. And the odor can be a lot worse if that stuff is not breaking down. Mm-hmm. So in a home backyard situation, it seems as though it's not a 100% no, but you're just avoiding a lot of potential problems by keeping that material out of it.
Yeah, no, it's erring on the side of caution definitely is a good way to go with a small pile.
A couple questions about going back to some paper usage, talking about composting cardboard, as well as like how small should these cardboard pieces be reduced to when you're composting? Like how small should you cut them?
Well, you could just rip like an egg carton. You could rip up newspaper. You can rip into strips. Cardboard, is going to compost a little slower maybe than newspaper. But I would say, if you can rip it up into, a dinner plate size or smaller, that would be helpful. It depends how active your compost pile is.
Yeah. The stuff compost regardless. You could put an entire, corrugated cardboard box in a compost pile and it would break down. It's just that it will take a lot longer if it's all in one big piece as opposed to in a bunch of smaller pieces. And, if you care about the aesthetics of your compost pile, having whole big pieces of cardboard boxes sticking out is not terrific either. So,
Chris, I just wanted to follow up. So on our resources slide, we do have that link from Seeds of Solidarity about using cardboard in your garden. So one potential, so it's the fourth bullet on this slide, one potential alternative if you do have cardboard that you want to compost is to use that as a mulch layer and then put your finished compost or soil on top of it in your garden. And then it doesn't, you actually want the cardboard to take a little longer to break down because it's killing those weeds underneath it in the meantime, and will break down eventually underneath your soil otherwise. So that's another alternative for if you have a large amounts of cardboard you want to use.
Yeah, we recommend that for people who are starting pollinator gardens or other areas where they're trying to remove lawn or remove a weedy area. If it's really weedy, you want to kill it first, potentially, there's a number of ways you can do that. Sometimes people use a tarp, but most of the weeds will die if you do that cardboard method. But that's a great way to start a garden in a new place, making sure that you don't have contaminants under the soil there as well beforehand.
Yeah, I've been doing cardboard mulch for a couple of years and would definitely recommend it. We just had a question about do weed seeds get destroyed if your compost is hot enough?
They do, and that's one thing we haven't talked about a lot in this webinar. As I said earlier, our home compost bins and piles are usually going to be too small to get hot enough to kill weed seeds and be able to accept meats and things like that. But I know there are some champion composters out there who do have large piles at home. 3 by 3 by 3 is the recommended size for a compost bin to get really hot. And then you're going to be approaching the temperatures that are needed to kill weed seeds. And a long-handled, 2 or 3 foot thermometer is a great tool for people that have really hot compost piles. So you can sink that into the middle and monitor that temperature. I think it has to get up to 140 degrees to kill the weed seeds.
I think that the thing to keep in mind for home composting is that you're going to be able to approach the temperature range that kills weed seed, but it's not very likely that you're going to consistently be above. I usually tell people 140 degrees if you really want to be sure you killed the weed seed. And in our piles we get as high as 168 degrees.
Wow.
So we're definitely killing the weed seed, but in a home pile, you're more likely to be in the 120 range most of the time. The other thing to look out for with regard to weed seed, and this is the trap we fall into with our own compost product, you can kill all the weed seed during the hot phase of your pile. But then if it takes you long enough to actually get around to using the pile for anything, it can get reinvaded with seed, basically.
On the top, yeah.
So that's something to look out for. If you have a pile that has finished up and you're not ready to use it, it's probably a real good idea to put some cover over it, a tarp or something, just so that blowing weed seed cannot blow into the pile and get started and produce more seed and so forth. So,
Chris, can I answer the question somebody had about pine needles?
Yes.
So we have a lot of pine needles here in Massachusetts, and it's impossible to keep them out of anything. So you can compost pine needles, but they are quite acidic. So the Mass DEP's one-pager there, Composting is Easy, says that pine needles should not make up more than 10% of your compost pile. So you can use pine needles to mulch around acidic-loving plants like blueberries, azaleas, and rhododendrons. But otherwise, they're not great for your compost, but it's impossible to keep them out. So just try to keep them less than 10%.
That's consistent with our experience. We know we cannot escape them, and if they come in as a small part of a mix, we're not too worried. But when somebody brings us a load of quote-unquote leaves that turns out to be 90% pine needles, we're not very happy. Relating to that, I would also say that on the subject of leaves in general, that it does depend somewhat what types of leaves you're talking about, because there are other trees that also tend to grow in acidic soils whose leaves are not nearly as good for composting. Oak leaves in particular come to mind. Also beech tree leaves are not as good. At the other end of the spectrum, maple leaves are essentially always great for composting.
All right, we're wrapping up with questions. I've got a couple more here, so if you either have any more or we haven't answered yours, please let us know. Just want to make sure that everyone gets answered. There's a question about bits for food waste in terms of how small they should be before composting. Is it useful to kind of cut them up or break them up, or can they be put in larger pieces? What do you recommend with that?
I don't think it's necessary to grind them up, but if you have a slow compost bin, it wouldn't hurt to cut them up a little bit. So like a bunch of giant broccoli stalks, just, you know, rough cut them into some smaller pieces and you'll be fine. Rick?
Yeah, I would say that, you know, a general principle is that size reduction is almost always good in terms of making composting happen faster, but I don't think it's essential for most food wastes at all. The only exception I would make to that, where I would, you know, urge people, especially in a backyard composting situation, to think about chopping the stuff up, would be things that don't compost easily. I'm thinking of things like citrus skins, especially grapefruit. They don't compost well at all, but if you chop them into small pieces, they do pretty well. I'm trying to think of some other examples. Let's see.
That's true with cardboard too.
Oh, there are a few things that just don't actually turn out to compost well at all, and therefore it might be best to skip them in the backyard composting. I'm thinking of avocado skins. The remnants of the meat inside the avocado compost fine, but the skins, we find entire dried up skins in the compost that we're screening all the time. So, and coconut husks, that's another one. The material inside composts, but the outside husk does not.
Chris, can I answer the other question about the plates?
Yeah, please jump in terms of helping me.
So somebody asked about the plates that you can buy like in regular grocery stores now that are labeled compostable, which are great. Those, yes, they will compost in your backyard compost pile if you rip them up into pieces. But over the past few years, we've come to find out that a lot of these products, even the ones labeled as compostable, excuse me, can contain polyfluorinated something or others, I can't think of the name right now, PFAS. And so the Biodegradable Products Institute, bpiworld.org, has a certification that says, hey, if you're going to be certified compostable, you got to remove this stuff. So look for that certification, bpiworld.org. It says BPI right on the package. And then those are safe to use.
There was, let's see, we got a couple questions hopping in. There's a question about where compostable baby diapers could be commercially composted.
Yeah, so there aren't many places that actually take compostable baby diapers. So it needs to go to a special, like a co-composting facility that is permitted and designed to accept, you know, human waste. And the diaper too. So it's unfortunate that, you know, there is a product that is technically compostable for diapers, and there is nowhere that I know of in Massachusetts that accepts this material, nowhere. So it's not accepted in commercial composting. It's not accepted at Martin's Farm.
Yep.
There might be places, and it's not accepted at Clearview Composting. Sorry, Rick. There might be places in other states or other regions that can actually take this material, but the one place that was permitted to accept this material closed a few years ago. So unfortunately, cloth diapers reign supreme as the low waste diaper. And I know they're difficult because I used them with my kids.
Yeah, we periodically, thankfully not often, but we periodically do get people including diapers in with the stuff that we receive. And because of the questions of knowing whether it's really truly a compostable one or not, and also the fact that DEP doesn't want us composting human waste, we tend to take all that material and put it in the trash. So.
I had another question. I already answered privately, just to mention, like, in general, things that have human waste, the risk is disease, but the content is not different than it's different, but not, you know, it's compostable, you know, but it's not recommended to have things that have human waste because of possible disease transmission. But there are facilities that treat that and convert it in some places in the world that do convert that to usable agricultural input, especially from like commercial composting toilet operations and things like that.
I just want to piggyback on a question I just answered when I was choking. The BPI certification, Biodegradable Products Institute, extends to Juliana V's question here about compostable plastic containers. This is intended specifically for commercial composting, like I covered earlier on in the presentation. So it can go to a facility like Clearview Composting in Orange or Martin's Farm in Greenfield, and other facilities that are certified by the state to accept large volumes of different types of materials, and they get the hot temperatures that are necessary to break down those compostable plastics. So if you have access to municipal composting at your town transfer station, that would be a perfect destination for your River Valley Market, one of my favorite places. River Valley Market, deli, what did she say? Deli and bulk food containers. And then if your town doesn't have such a program, you could ask them to start it. Sometimes they say to me, when I say to the towns, let's start commercial municipal composting, they say, oh, but nobody would do that. And I'm like, yes, they would. They're doing it in all the other towns that are doing it. So the towns of Amherst and Northampton each have commercial compost, municipal compost drop-off at their town transfer station, as do the 10 towns in Franklin County that have those dumpsters that were shown in the presentation, such as Greenfield, Berniston, Deerfield, Conway, Wendell, Whately, Orange, and New Salem. I probably missed a few. But these are, the DEP is giving towns monetary rewards for offering these programs. So there's really a lot of incentives for a town to offer this type of program for their residents.
I wanted to pipe into, one of my colleagues mentioned earlier that in Northampton and Amherst, Pedal People is another curbside compost pickup option. And there are some others too. So like Amy was saying earlier in the presentation about having her compostables that she composts at home, and then also having a separate curbside pickup for any of the ones that need to go to a commercial level composter. Wherever you are in Massachusetts, there may be an option for you for a small curbside pickup or a transfer station drop off. So feel free to let us know.
Yeah, so look at recyclingworksma.com not .org like we had an error earlier in the presentation. Somebody caught that. And just to go back to Julianne, the original question, these compostable plastics will not break down in your home compost bin. So don't even waste your time and energy trying. They're meant for commercial composting. A paper plate is like an egg carton. So yeah, that will break down in your home compost, but the compostable plastics are meant for high heat composting.
I also wanted to chime in. There was a question about salmonella regarding chicken bedding, and that actually ties in well with what we were saying about other pet bedding and diapers and other potential pathogens in general. So with regards to salmonella and chicken bedding specifically, chickens carry salmonella in their intestinal tract the same way that we naturally have E. coli in our intestinal tract. It's a natural part of their system. I actually co-authored a study that was published a couple of years ago showing low incidence of salmonella in backyard flocks. They tend to be healthy and be kept cleaner and have slightly more robust immune systems than I think you find in a typical industrial or commercial level egg production system. Not necessarily here in Massachusetts, because most of our farms are considered small farms on the national scale, but when you're talking about large industrial commercial production, which ties in also with a broader concept that probably many of you on this call are aware of, which is the smaller food system versus industrial level food system issue. So to bring that back around to the original question, if your birds are kept clean and healthy and have plenty of space and you maintain them regularly, salmonella is probably a fairly low risk in your compost. But that said, any compost that you're putting on your garden, or in this includes bagged stuff that you buy from elsewhere, it's generally a good practice to rinse any edible foods a little bit before you consume them anyway. So that's, if you know that fruits and vegetables are growing up off the ground and haven't come in contact with your soil through splash from watering or anything like that, maybe less of a big deal, but certainly leafy greens that are low to the ground, always a good idea to rinse them a little. And especially if you know that you've put pet bedding, composted pet bedding on them, then that's a good practice anyway. So I wanted to mention that broader topic related to the more specific chicken one too. With that, I think we've gotten a bunch more questions. We like to joke that all of us could talk trash for hours, literally. But it's nearly 2 o'clock now, and we've slowly been losing folks as people needed to go. So I think maybe 1 or 2 more questions, and a big thanks to everyone for joining us.
Watch your email for what? I'm sorry.
I was going to say, Christy, and to everyone who's on still, you can reach out to me or others of us by email with other questions, or if you need more assistance, you can give me a call as well, especially if you're in Worcester County. But even those who are outside but within Mass, I can connect you to people who can help too.
Yeah, so, and also I failed to provide our Facebook page here in the resources. Our Franklin County Solid Waste District Facebook page has a composting tutorial how-to, and it also has a tutorial on lasagna gardening, which is composting in place with layers of unwanted materials, or wanted in my case. And so you can look at that Facebook page for some more tutorials.
And as we wrap up, something I think that would be very helpful, we've gotten some great questions and feedback from all of you. In the follow-up email where we send out the slides and the recording, I think we can also include a link for a short survey on if you're looking for any follow-up webinars. It seemed like there was a lot of interest specifically in vermiculture, but we can include some other topics. And please let us know, what you all would be interested in, and we'd be happy to try to tailor to those topics.
Definitely. I feel like that's a good wrap-up point. There's always going to be more questions. But I guess since I'm the host here, I can wrap us up, unless Amy or Christy or Rick or Chris or any of you have other things to say here at the end. But I wanted to thank everyone for being here and for coming on the webinar. And hopefully we can do more of these in the future, and hopefully some more in-person workshops. And we'll be in communication with you about the small scale socially distant ones that we'll offer in the near future, but hope to be able to do more after that. I don't know, Amy, if you have any more things you wanted to say.
I just want to say thank you to everyone who participated. Even at the end, almost 2 hours later, we've still got 69 people listening to us yammer on. So I really appreciate it. This has been a huge, huge response to this. So thank you everyone for taking time out of your day.